Chapter 3 Lady Ice. Paris, October 1922. It was a brisk fall morning, and Indy bundled his leather jacket around his throat as he traipsed along the boulevard to St. Michael. Unlike most of the Frenchmen he passed on the street, he wasn't wearing a scarf. Madeline had given him one last Christmas, but he hadn't seen her for several weeks, and wearing it reminded him of her. He leaned forward, pulled his hat low over his brow, and picked up the pace. He not only wanted to escape the cold, but he was looking forward to the lecture this morning in his Greek archaeology class. The topic was Apollo's Oracle, and he was curious about the approach Professor Bellakamis would take. He crossed the campus, heading directly to the classroom building. After 2 years of studying at the Sorbonne, he felt he knew the city almost as well as a native Parisian. But of course, he would always be a foreigner here, and oddly enough, he liked the feeling. He was an outsider, on the inside. He was in his third year of a PhD program that focused on ancient written languages, and was taking his second course in classical Greek archaeology. It fit well with his study of Old Greek, but there was also something else about the course that particularly captivated him: the professor. Everything about her, from the clothes and perfume she wore to the way she talked and walked, was distinctly feminine. And yet, beneath this veneer, he sensed a strength and self-possession that intrigued him. The dichotomy hinted at the mysteries of this woman and also defined the boundaries of her personal area. "Too close and you're in trouble," it whispered. So far, that had not been a problem. He was midway through his second course with her and was excelling in it. His knowledge of Old Greek, as well as his thorough understanding of Greek mythology, made him something of a standout among his peers, but she had acted as if he didn't exist. A few days earlier, he had approached her after class and asked a couple of questions about her lecture. She'd answered in a brusque tone that matched the cold indifference in her eyes. He refused to be intimidated, and had told her how much he enjoyed her lectures. "That's nice," she'd said, then excused herself and brushed past him. Dorian Bellakamis was Lady Ice. That was the way he thought of her. Yet ice could be melted, and somewhere below her thick protective coating there must be a warm, friendly woman who longed for intimacy. Or so he fantasized. Lost in thought, he collided with someone as he entered the classroom and realized it was she. He dropped to one knee to retrieve the notebook that had slipped from Bellakamis's hand. His eyes shifted to her trim legs, which were just inches from his head. On most days, she dressed in a long skirt and a white blouse covered by a sleeveless velveteen waistcoat. But today she wore a shorter plaid schoolgirl dress that made her look as if she might be one of the students rather than the instructor. She crouched and plucked up a paper that had slipped out of the notebook. They stood at the same time, and their eyes met. Hers were lovely, wide, and dark, almost black. "Sorry, Dr. Bellakamis. I didn't see you." "Thanks, Jones." She flicked a hand at her thick raven hair. It was tied back with a bow and set off her compelling eyes, high cheekbones, and full mouth. "Nice running into you. See me after class. I have something to talk to you about." Abruptly, she turned away and walked to the podium. Indy gazed after her, astonished that she'd actually smiled at him. He glanced around the classroom, expecting to see looks of envy from the men, knowing glances from the women, but no one seemed to notice. He'd broken, or at least cracked, the cake of ice that encased Dorian Bellakamis, and no one cared. What was with these guys? Their expressions were as inscrutable as the mugs of the skulls that stared out from the cases that lined the walls of the room. The French were supposed to be lovers, but none of them seemed to think there was anything special about their instructor. He sat down on the desk on the aisle, opened his notebook, and tried to think of reasons she would want to see him. He could think of none. A plain-looking girl with stringy brown hair and wire-rimmed glasses leaned over towards him from the next seat. "God, did you see how she's dressed today?" she whispered. "Like she thinks she's one of us." No comparison, Indy thought. Worlds apart. Worlds improved. "She's not. Not even close," he said, in a commiserating tone. He turned back to his notebook, cutting off the conversation. The topic today is one with which I am intimately familiar, Bellacamus began. Ironic, he thought. She was intimate with a dead city. As a child, I visited the ruins of Delphi during the early years of the modern restoration, which began in 1892. Her eyes darted to the door, and a late arrival squirmed under her gelid stare as he found a seat. As a high school student and later in college, I spent my summers working first as a volunteer, then as a paid assistant at the site. Delphi became the focus of my graduate study, as my PhD thesis. Before coming to teach here, I spent 5 years as the chief archaeologist at the ruins while associated with the University of Athens. She looked down a moment and smiled to herself. One of my assistants once made the mistake of jokingly referring to me as Pythia. As we all know, Pythia was the name of the succession of women who served as Apollo's oracle, or the Oracle of Delphi. To become Pythia, a woman had to be from a poor farmer's family, more than 50 years old, and not particularly intelligent. Her eyes roamed around the room. I hope you can understand why I did not feel particularly charmed by the comment. This elicited a collective laugh from the class. Bella Camus definitely fit neither the age bracket nor the intelligence quotient, and she most likely was not from a poor family, Indy thought. Pythia made her pronouncements from the altar in the Temple of Apollo, where she sat on a copper and gold tripod set above a fissure in the earth. Intoxicating vapors supposedly rose from the aperture, causing the woman to enter a frenzied trance. She smiled again, as if at some private joke, and her gaze settled on Indy. One witness from the 1st century AD described Pythia's transformation this way. Her eyes flashed, she foamed at the mouth, her hair stood on end. Then she would reply to the question which had been put to her. Indy suddenly felt as though she were speaking only to him, that the rest of the class no longer mattered. Heat crept up the back of his neck. His eyes remained riveted on her, taking in the way the light slipped over her black hair and glinted in her dark eyes. Her answer was always an incoherent babble of words and phrases. Incoherent to all, that is, except the temple priests, who interpreted them for the petitioner. Bellacamus looked over the class. By the way, does anyone know what the word Delphi means? Mr. Jones, our Greek scholar. How about it? So she had been looking at him, and she was aware of his study of ancient Greek. It means place of the dolphin. She nodded. Okay, but tell me, why is it called that? Indy had learned the mythical history of Delphi as a child, long before he even knew that Greece was a country. Apollo arrived at the shrine in the form of a dolphin. And what did he find there? He suddenly felt as if he were 12 years old again, and his father was drilling him on the myths he'd assigned him to study. But Dorian Bellacamus was hardly his father. A dragon named Python. It was the serpent son of Gaia, the earth goddess, and Poseidon, the earth shaker. Python lived in a cave on the mountain and spoke prophecies through Pythian priestesses. And what happened? Apollo killed the dragon and tossed him into a crevice in the earth. Thank you, Mr. Jones. Her eyes flicked away from him and darted around the room. Now let's move away from the mythological aspects to our historical knowledge of Delphi. She explained that for more than a millennium, from approximately 700 BC to AD 362, the mountain retreat had been the site of an oracle. She moved away from the podium as she continued talking. It was obvious she didn't need any notes. At the height of its influence, Delphi was the seat of power in the Mediterranean, virtually scripting the political history of the region. Hardly any actions of consequence were taken by the rulers without consulting the oracle. Even skeptical philosophers, including Plato and Socrates, held the oracle in high regard. Over the years, Delphi accumulated a vast treasure of gold and marble statues, paintings, and jewelry, all tributes from clients. Were the predictions actually accurate? One of the students asked. I was just getting to that. The predictions were often worded in ambiguous phrases open to varying interpretations, she said. However, one of the possibilities usually was accurate. Let me give you a few examples. When asked how the Greeks would fare against a Persian attack in 480 BC, The oracle said to trust the wooden walls. Although the meaning of the walls was debated, the Greeks successfully defended themselves and their wooden fleet of ships, even though they were surrounded. So those who interpreted the wooden walls as wooden ships were proved correct, she concluded. When the Roman Emperor Nero was warned, "Beware of 73," he chose to interpret the prediction as meaning that he would die at the age of 73. Instead, he was overthrown at age 31 by Galba, who was 73. Some predictions were accurate in only an ambiguous or even cynical sense, she continued. For instance, Croesus was told that if he invaded neighboring Cyprus, he would destroy a mighty empire. He did. His own. Hocus pocus, Indy thought. He doubted that Plato or Socrates gave a damn about the oracle. They gave lip service to the oracle only because it was the religion of the time. To defy that authority would have cost them dearly. Indy knew from his studies that the powerful priests who interpreted the babblings of Pythia were at the center of the Amphistonic League, a coalition of Greek city-states, and were therefore well informed about important activities throughout the region. They simply used the oracle to create an aura of truth to their proclamations. In effect, the old woman called Pythia was simply a ritualistic vehicle of no actual consequence. He also knew that his father would lash out at him if he ever said such a thing to him. Reducing Apollo's oracle to a form of political corruption lacking any mystical reality was hearsay. But all through his childhood, Indy had watched his father become increasingly mired in mystical musings that had taken over his life and virtually ruined his own. He raised his hand. What exactly were those vapors that Pythia breathed when she made her prophecies? Bellacamus sounded amused by the question. Ah, the legendary mephitic gases, as they were called. Who knows? Legend has it that the vapors came from the rotting carcass of Python. Fortunately, scientists don't take myths and legends as fact, Indy responded. That's where religion and science part. Bellacamus stopped in front of him. Indy's eyes were drawn to her strong, tawny legs, bare almost to her knees. So what do you think the vapors were, Mr. Jones? He raised his eyes from her legs. For a moment he didn't answer. Her presence so near him nearly overwhelmed him. He cleared his throat and gathered his thoughts. She challenged him, and he would meet her head on. Most likely they were a mixture of burning incense and bay leaves. Pythia inhaled the mixture and chewed narcotic laurel leaves to enter a trance state. The so-called vapors were just another way for the priests to mystify and ritualize the activities. Bellacamus crossed her arms. You're very rational, Mr. Jones. That's good. But sometimes we need to spur our imaginations in archaeology. Myths are often a springboard to truth and understanding. They can also baffle and mislead, and too often are taken as the truth themselves, he responded. Even by intelligent people. His father, for instance. Bellacamus smiled and moved back to the podium. Well said. I hope everyone here understands the double nature of myths. As the hour neared its end, Bellacamus said she wanted to make an announcement. This lecture on Delphi, as you know, has been scheduled for weeks, but oddly enough it coincides with an urgent matter at Delphi. Just 2 days ago there was a minor earthquake in the area. Was there much damage? Someone asked. The quake caused the earth to buckle, and a crevice has opened in Apollo's temple. But on the bright side, there apparently has also been a new discovery. A stone tablet has been spotted protruding from inside the chasm. What's on it? Someone else asked. We don't know yet. I'll be leaving Paris shortly to inspect the site. What this means is that my teaching assistant will take over the course for the remainder of the semester. Indy felt a sudden vacancy in his chest, an absence of vital organs, as though his heart had been suctioned out. I want to wish you all the best for the semester. You've been a very attentive group. I'll miss you. Everyone applauded. As a line of students filed past Bellacamus, wishing her well, Indy remained at his desk. Finally, as the last few students left, he stood up and approached the podium. Mr. Jones, I hope I'm not keeping you from anything. Another class? A girlfriend waiting in the hall, perhaps? No. Not at all. Good. I asked you to wait because I wanted to tell you more about my immediate plans. You do? Her eyes locked on his. Her look was as penetrating and intimate as an embrace, and its intensity astonished him. Would you be interested in accompanying me to Delphi as my assistant? Me? Yes. You're my best student, and I'll need help from someone not associated with the University of Athens. Politics, if you know what I mean. Well, I'm not sure that I can leave right away, he stammered. I mean, it's the middle of the semester. She waved a hand. Don't worry. I'll take care of everything with the university. My emergency leave was approved, and you'll receive credit for field study. Your basic costs will be covered by my research budget. What do you say? Indy wasn't quite sure how to respond. On the one hand, he was ecstatic, but on the other, her assumption that he would simply drop everything irritated him. Besides, archaeology wasn't even his field of study. It's kind of sudden. She took a step closer to him and smiled. It'll be worth it, Henry. He wanted to correct her, to tell her to call him Indy, that Henry was his father. But just the same, sorry, but just the fact that she'd addressed him by his first name was a major breakthrough. It was as if some invisible barrier between professor and student had been pierced. To act familiar was saying that you were equals, and she'd made it clear from the first day of class that she was not their equal. She'd not only been schooled in Greek archaeology since her teens, but she was of the Greek culture. It was in her blood. In her class, she was the authority, the living source of knowledge, and they were sponges, there to absorb her wisdom. And now she was giving him what might be the chance of a lifetime. It'll be worth it. Of course, she'd meant the opportunity to work at Delphi, but hadn't she hinted at more? Or was he just imagining it? I'd like to think about it, but it sounds interesting. Such a weak word, but nothing else came to mind. Don't wait too long, Henry. Her voice was low and breathy. Opportunities like this don't come along every day. And that's the end of the chapter. Hope you enjoyed it. Talk to you soon.